there, welcome to Let's Talk with Maggie Dulcio. Today you will hear a special interview that I did with me and my good friend Deborah Joseph. It is on the topic of motherhood and the state of our family in our society today. So I sat down and talked to Deborah, and she shared her own personal experiences. And I invite you to sit back and lean in and let's talk. So thank you so much for agreeing to participate and to do this. This is something that, we've been talking about for a while, pre-corona.
Okay.
Since
Yep.
after I wrote the book, the
Yes.
Unmasking the Married Single Mom, the phenomena of being married and feeling like you were a single mom. And how I had wanted to do this was to have, conversations with, various women and just talk about it, because it's something that many of us are feeling or experiencing, but we feel like, hey, maybe it's just me, and we don't realize that it's an issue that many women struggle with. And since I wrote the book, and you yourself, you have like, okay, let's do this. We need to talk about this.
Of course, yeah.
And originally how I wanted to do it is have, maybe different events where we would have these round tables and, we would talk about the issues. But that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And we have Corona here.
We
don't
sure
know
do.
how long Corona is going to stay.
She's going to be here, yeah.
So I thought, hey, with technology, everybody is Zooming, everybody is doing these, meetings where we may not be together in one location, but we can have these conversations.
Definitely.
And I had thought maybe, having a panel, but with different schedules, it wasn't quite possible.
Trying to find the right time.
Yeah, so I thought, okay, well then if we can't have panels, we can have one-on-one conversations. And maybe eventually we'll be able to have the round table where we have different women. But the goal is to talk frankly about, the issues, and, in a, hope that people will be able to relate, and they'll be able to feel like, hey, I'm not alone, even though, your situation may not change, but at least, know you're not alone. And then maybe offer people, women some tips on how to manage.
I agree.
So again, thank you.
Of course.
So we'll start with an introduction. So if you could tell us, who you are, how long you've been married, how many children, their ages, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Deborah Joseph, and I've been married for 7 years. Actually, a week and a half ago was my 7th anniversary. So we've been in the we're 7 years old now, so we're still in elementary school, so which is good. I have 2 children. I have almost 6-year-old next week, Raquel Anakawana Deborah Joseph, and then I have Aji. She's 2, acts like she's 12, and she'll be 3 in December. And I mean, they're my joy. I think just having 2 beautiful Haitian girls, to be able to have the opportunity to really be a part of stewarding them and be a part of like the witness of what God's trying to do in them. And Raquel and I get to play this role of being their parents. Yeah.
Right. That's amazing. I remember when I was having my first child, which was many years ago.
Just a few years ago.
Just a few years ago. And just like you said, I remember just thinking about the gravity of motherhood, bringing another life into this world, and to have the honor of shaping that life
Yeah,
and affecting the next generation
of
and the
course.
next and the next, and to have that opportunity to do that. And there are so many women who try to have children, and there's infertility, especially in
Yeah,
recent years. You hear women, there are a lot of women who struggle with infertility,
yeah.
and to have the opportunity to be a mother, to bring forth life. So I can totally relate with
Mhm.
you saying that, feeling like, oh my goodness, I have these lives that
Mhm.
now I can, have an impact in our
Mhm.
world. And so that's
Mhm.
great. So the first question I would ask is, what do you feel is like the most rewarding experience of being a mom?
Yeah, when trying to reflect on that, I think one, not knowing that I could even have children. I think when I think about my upbringing and I think about like I got to a part of my life where I was just like, do I want to be married? Do I not? This is what like late 20s, early 30s. I was going back and forth of like, man, I seen my childhood and I seen the things that I've had to experience, the good, great, ugly, bad. And I'm like, do I want children? Do I actually want to be a part of raising children,
Right.
And I think about like the willingness of it and then the actual like physicality of just like, can I actually bear children? And then I was like, okay, when I got married, there was always this thing of like, oh my gosh, I would love to have 12 children. And Raquel was just like, with who, And he's looking at me like, I'll go for four. And then we had our one, and it was like, okay, we're good. So I think for me, the rewarding thing is that, okay, the fact that like, okay, for Anna being the first one that came out, I was just sort of like, oh my gosh, you basically invaded my space for 9 months and I get to see you. Like, you're a reflection of Raquel and I, and I see her personality and it's like totally me, and I'm like, oh, I have mini me's running around. And I think too, even just like the labor part of it, of like it was so difficult, and realizing like I didn't want a girl. Like I was just like, girls are headache. I know what I went through as myself, and I'm like, I didn't want it to be repeated. Not thinking like, oh, God can change the trajectory of things, but it was more
Right.
so of like, I know what I went through. I've seen what a lot of young Black girls have gone through, a lot of young Haitian girls have through. Did I want to repeat that cycle? And so I think for me, the most rewarding thing is like, I get to, I don't know. I got two little girls. I got two little, literally mini Deborahs running around, and I have an opportunity to say, okay, how was my childhood? As much as like I'm gonna be like, oh, I'm not gonna be like my mom. There are things that I pick up and I do. But I think the
Right.
rewarding thing is like I get to see these two little girls like act like me, literally talk like me, joke like me, and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, anything that I don't deal with myself, if I don't deal with any broken parts of me or try to, get healthier, I can do that to them. I can instill that back into them. And so, what is my choice every single day, waking up and saying, like, man, these girls, like look up to me, and so I have a choice right now to do the best that I can. And am I going to mess it up? Of course. But I think
Right.
the rewarding thing is like, man, I don't know, like, especially the fact that they have my personalities. I'm like, that's really rewarding. Like,
Right.
oh
Right.
my gosh, like they emulate these things that I do. And when you look at that, you're like, oh, so if I do something negative or bad, they themselves too. I think about if I say like, shut up, and I know I say it long enough, they're going to pick up on it. And when I tell them don't say that, they're going to be like, well, you say it. You
Right.
know what I'm
Right.
saying? And so I think what's rewarding is like they have my personalities. Like the one thing for me right now is just kind of like, man, I got these two little kids running around and it's like, it's me. So yeah.
So it's kind of like your fingerprint, like this is me, like this
Yeah.
is, yeah, this is what I've, done, and what, I've affected. I've
Yes.
and it's like to see that, you know,
Yes.
it's having the concept of, yeah, I am a mother, I have children is one thing, but to actually see the product in your children and seeing,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
definitely.
And I think also too, the rewarding thing is like, okay, I think about like, I have an opportunity not to lie to my kids. So if I'm sad and Nana comes up to me and say, "Mommy, what's wrong?" I think we grew up where we're like, we're good. Like, and I know we'll get to that further on into the conversation, but I just think about an opportunity to say, mommies and daddies do get sad sometimes, like mommy's going through a hard day right now. And then she says, "Is it because of me?" And I have an opportunity right now to say, "Oh, no, baby, never. It's not because of you. It's just sort of like, this is just the day. You're going to have a day that it's going to be great, and you're going to have a day that it's not going to be so great." And so I think what's rewarding too is like, we have an opportunity to totally be transparent with our children and let them see the good, the bad, what I'm saying, the great
Right.
in that moment. And it goes from like this extreme of like all or nothing. So I could lie to her, and then she's gonna grow up and be like, "Well, dang, mom, whenever I asked you if you were okay, you always pretended like you were good." And then she has this falsehood of like, "Well, things are great." You know what I'm saying? So I think it's rewarding as well that I can be myself to my children. Of
Right.
course, they're not gonna get, my homegirls like you are gonna get the whole, "Oh my gosh, today was rough," but they're gonna get like, "It's sad today, baby," and mommy sometimes get sad. So yeah, I think it's an opportunity. It's rewarding, an opportunity to be honest with our
Right.
children.
So for someone like you who is open and see that as an opportunity to show them how life is, to do life with them is
Yes.
rewarding because you
Yes.
have, you have an influence,
Yes.
they have the opportunity to see you and know how to deal with life.
Yes.
Whereas if it was someone who was not quite open, like you said, there are people that are very reserved who think that, in protecting their children, showing them, hey, I have to be tough,
Yeah.
may not be as rewarding because
Yeah.
they feel like, okay, I have to shelter, I have to protect, I can't be real, I have to
Yeah.
have this
Mm-hmm.
mask on. So
Yeah.
that's beautiful that you see it as, hey, it's my opportunity to show them life, because it's very important. Because we oftentimes we think we are
Yeah.
protecting our kids and
Yep.
sheltering them, but what we've done is we've created this bubble for them, and then we send them out in the world, and it's like,
And
oh
they're
my
like,
God.
"What the heck?" Yeah.
Yes, yes,
It's like sort of like I've heard speeches when couples get married, and let's just say they're celebrating their parents' 20th, 25th, or 50th, or 75th, wedding anniversary, and they get up to give the speech of like, "Oh my gosh, I've watched my parents never argue. They always loved each other." And I'll be sitting there, and God forgive me, I've judged, because I'm like, "You've never sat through an argument of a parent?" Like, and then you get into this marriage and you expect to never have conflict.
right,
And so
right,
then you're like, "Oh my gosh, well, my parents did it and they were
right,
okay." And then you're sitting in front of your spouse and you're like, I didn't want yellow rice tonight. I actually wanted,
right.
Jojo, whatever it could be. And
Right.
then, so I think in the same way, you're right. You hit it on the nail. It's like sort of like life has ups and downs and obstacles. And so when we tell our kids like everything's going to be great, it's great. And they themselves grow up and they see like, "Oh my gosh, you're dealing with grievance and all this kind of stuff." And they go back and you're like, and they come back and ask you, "Mom and dad, or mom, why didn't you ever tell me that like life gets hard, or was it ever hard for you?" Like, you're right. I think, especially culturally speaking, a lot of our parents did not want to give us that negative aspect. It was just kind of like, "We're good. We're going to make it. God is good. God is great." And he is. But what held us back from actually being honest to say, "Man, it's rough today. I need to lean on some more of Jesus." So I think you hit it on the nail saying that.
Yeah. And this a great way to talk about our challenges because we often see, the picture that is presented for, marriage, family is this picture perfect, rosy,
Yeah.
you know, happy, everybody's a happy all the time
Yeah. Yeah.
picture that we often see people present. And I guess in a way, everybody wants to be,
Yeah.
shown in a positive
Yeah.
light. But we do know that there are challenges. Marriage is
Mhm.
challenging. Raising children
Mhm.
can be quite challenging. What do you think are some challenges that we often don't talk about or even in your own, your own experience life, whether, when you were growing up or even
Mm-hmm.
in your marriage, raising your kids, what are some challenges that you think we don't really talk about?
I think that your segue into challenges is the fact of the word challenge. That is one thing that we don't discuss. So people, in my childhood, we didn't talk about pain. We didn't talk about you know uh, obstacles as far as like a grievance that was done, abuse, trauma. Those are just unheard of. I get it. Our parents came here surviving, and there is no room to be like my feelings are hurt. It's sort of like, look, I'm working hard to just provide an education for you, and therefore like do what you got to do, whatever. So let's just say you have a bully at school that's making fun of you. I was raised like being made fun of because I was Haitian, and just kind of like I was very tomboyish, and all those explain of like the abuse that I've gone to, whether physical, verbal, or sexual abuse. So there was no room to actually say, hey, I'm being picked on, or there was no room to say, actually, I was sexually abused. So we have all these challenges that have been faced, and so you grow up like, oh, that's a taboo subject. You can never bring it up. And so I think part of the challenge is realizing like, where is room for my past to come up, and not in a way of like, oh, just give it all to the Lord. Amen. I agree with that coming from a Christian background, but I also think there has to be some safe space to say, this happened to me and it caused me to be X, Y, and Z, and I have not healed from that. And so therefore, because it hasn't been dealt with and has been healed, we bring it into marriage. And I think for me, being married for 7 years, Raquel and I are opposites. Like, I am super like extreme high. I'm a wooer or whatever, and he's super like introvert, kind of quiet or whatever. And I realized like our upbringings have shaped that. So for me, it was funny because just yesterday we got into an argument, you know, and I had meat out that I had thought out or whatever, and he wanted to do ribs. And I remember, instead of communicating, I was just like, man, didn't you see that I already had meat out? Like, why would you do that or whatever? Like, I went from 0 to 100, right? And he's looking at me like, it's not that serious. That's fine. I'll bring it back or whatever. But I made this whole big thing about it. And what triggered for me, Maggie, what triggered for me was like, there are times where my mom would come home, she'd prepare something, and my dad would just be extreme or mad about something and totally changes it up. And then I felt myself have an out of body experience, which is like, oh, you're not going to dictate to me what we going to do and not good. That wasn't even the case. That wasn't even an issue. But I later realized
Right,
like, oh
right.
my gosh, I went from 0 to 100 over something that was so silly. Why is that? Because I think there's a part of me that still has some undealt tension and issues from my upbringing, or just seeing how my parents related with each other, and therefore I want to carry that over into our marriage. And so I think when you
Right.
say what are some of the challenges, I think that word in itself is the issue, because we don't talk about challenges, we don't talk about conflict, and so for therefore, because we don't know how to, and it just kind of like continues to be this thing, and then it blows up, so I would say that I
Right.
would say a place to bring up trauma, a place to bring up like hurt, is some of the challenges I think I faced growing up, and also in spaces of marriage.
Hmm. And I love how you had that argument and you were able to identify that the source of what you were feeling, where it was, because often we're not able to make that connection. The fact that you have such insight, that's wonderful. And I know in working with my clients, I often try to help them make the connection between the thoughts and the feelings,
Mm-hmm.
because the feelings often is a result of whatever the thought was.
Mm.
And sometimes the thought is ordered. It could be a thought from, your own insecurity. It could be a thought about probably an earlier
Yeah.
interaction with
Yeah.
that person, but it was a completely different situation. So you can't really bring that
Yeah.
situation into the current situation. But there's that thought. And oftentimes we don't realize there is a thought that's causing us to have these
Yep.
emotions that we
Yep.
have.
I agree.
And then we just go on the emotion and don't make that connection with the thought. So it's
Yeah.
great that you were able to do that and
Mm-hmm.
realize, hey, this is where I'm getting my,
Yeah.
where this is coming from, my
Yeah.
reaction, why I'm
Yeah.
reacting that way,
Yeah.
and to be able to say, okay, I need to make, some changes,
Yeah.
confront the
Yeah.
distortion
Yeah.
and modify. And it's great that you talk about how in the relationships and in the family, oftentimes we don't want to talk about the challenges. We don't want to
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about the things that make us uncomfortable. We don't want to
Yeah.
talk about the trauma. We don't want to talk. We just want to,
Yeah.
shove everything under the rug and just
Yeah.
move on. And
Yeah.
and that's not healthy. um
Nope.
but sometimes the challenges also I can think of um are things that are societal,
Yeah.
the expectations that's put on
That's
us,
true.
especially women.
That's true. That's true.
And
Yep.
sometimes those expectations are unrealistic. We either
Yeah.
have accepted them or we try to live to that expectation. And then it's
Mm-hmm.
hard for us to be able to live to something that's unrealistic and we don't
That's
address
true.
it. And sometimes like silently suffering,
Yeah.
we thinking that, well, maybe the other person should understand what I'm
That's true.
feeling, but
That's
we
true.
haven't communicated
Yep.
what we are feeling, and
Yeah.
then we're getting overwhelmed and
Yep.
frustrated and not know what we need to do
Yeah.
or how to deal with our
Yep.
situation. So in looking back, I know you said earlier how, when you were in your 20s, you were thinking, yeah, do I really want to get married?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now looking back, and knowing what you know now, what do you think you would say to your younger self?
So I think that it's more so of like okay, you need to work on some things. So marriage is not going to fix stuff. Having children is not going to fix stuff. So I think for me, I was looking at it like I don't want to get married because I'm like, I know what I went through. I see what my parents went through. And I didn't see it as like my parents or my childhood does not dictate what marriage and what parenting or motherhood looks like. So I think I would be like,
Right.
hey, um, let's work on you. So figuring out where to find resources to do some counseling, to do some there, like early on, to know that, like, I knew those things existed and I had a
Right.
negative look on it, but I think it would be sort of like, okay, I keep saying I don't want to, and it's because of those only specific reasons, instead of like, hey, marriage is a beautiful thing, motherhood is a beautiful thing, of course it has its challenges, but I went in very pessimistic. I was like, oh heck no, if that's what it means, then I do not want to be a part of that, and I stayed away from that. And a lot of it had to do with not only my upbringing, but also uh things that I personally struggled with. And so I was just kind of like, I'm jacked up in these specific ways. There is no way that I want to bring that into a relationship. And I don't want, like, I'm already jacked up, and I don't want the person that's jacked up to come in and it's just not going to produce anything really well. So I think I stayed away from that. I think I dated a couple of people in my 20s, but it wasn't until like, I mean, even after that, when it was a relationship, it was like 10 years or 11 years later before I actually met Raquel and we ended into a relationship. That's how much I feared wanting to get into a relationship, because I did not, I was so in my mind so messed up of where I was just like, I don't want to get into that. So I think I would tell my younger
Mm-hmm.
self, like, okay, you have so much fear, you have so much bondages, you need to actually find trustworthy people to actually unpack those things. I
Right.
think
Right.
early on that would have helped so much. Obviously God is sovereign, and he makes ways, and he puts people in your place, but I think
That's right.
if early on I entered in with that mindset of like, okay, I need some therapy, I really need to sit down and unpack a lot of these things, then I think I would have been like, all right, yeah, let's do it, God, if you present somebody for me, let's go for it. Instead of like, I fought Raquel to the T, before I even said, yeah,
Right.
let's do it, let's get married. So yeah.
We get into relationship not realizing how much what we bring into it affect the relationship, because we're focused
Yeah.
on the other person, what the other person is doing, but we have a big part in it too. And if
Yeah.
we have issues that have not been resolved, then, we are imperfect beings.
Yeah.
So when
Yep.
you have two imperfect beings in any relationship,
Yeah.
there's bound to be conflict. But
Yeah.
then when there are unresolved issues, things that haven't been addressed, then it makes it even more challenging. So that you
Yeah.
said that, you would tell your younger self, hey, work on yourself. Because so
Yes.
many of
Yes.
us, we don't realize we got to work on ourselves before we can invite
Yeah.
somebody else in
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
world, in our circle, and then to do life
Yep.
together.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
if
it's
we
opposite
have
because we
stuff,
think,
so yeah, I appreciate that. And
yeah.
so you say you would tell yourself to work on you before getting married. And then also I think oftentimes we get into marriage too with this unrealistic expectation as to what marriage is. Do you think you understood what marriage was, or your expectations?
No. No, you know what? I was sort of like, man, you get married, and it's like, oh, the person finishes your sentence for you. Like you get breakfast in bed every single day. It's sort of like, oh, I don't feel like cooking, and all of a sudden the meal's presented to you. Or you're intimate a lot. Saying I thought about that too. I was like, oh, you've
Uh-huh.
seen in movies, and you're like, oh, it lasts this long and stuff like that, and you're like, it is does not last that long. You know what I'm saying? That's it, and you're ready to like, look, get off of me, or like what? Oh my gosh, like I have a list of We're getting real here. This is a real platform, so we're of course. But
Yes.
I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be like this, it's gonna be like great. And I was like, I knew I'm marrying a Haitian man too, so I was just kind of like, oh, he's gonna say Haitian poems to me in French or in English and all this kind of stuff. And I was just kind of like, even if I don't understand French, but I'm like, ooh, oui, la la, or whatever, girl, like that is not it at all. Now I'm not saying those things didn't happen. Those things didn't happen, but it was sort of like, oh my gosh, like that's not even real. That's not
Yes.
real life. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Especially if
Right.
you're dealing
Right.
with someone that is like internal. So Ragel's an internal processor and I'm an external processor. And so already like crash where I'm like, for me,
Uh-huh.
I feel it, I hear it, I think it, I say it. He's like, I feel it, I hear it, it's kept in. So already that, you know what I'm saying? And
He's
so
processing, molding
ex-
over it, and
exactly, so even at that, or realizing like, what I'm saying, like when it comes to intimacy, having to figure out like likes or dislikes or even communicating through that, whereas just for us, we didn't talk about that when we were dating. We just really wanted to keep it kind of pure even when we were engaged. And so to have a conversation about intimacy after you're married is sort of like, oh, awkward. Okay, I guess we're just going to figure this thing out. You know what I'm saying? So I think you're right. I think there were a lot of expectations, partly to see what the media
yes,
have shown, and then your upbringing, and then you're seeing
right,
other couples and their
right,
relationship. And it has formed to thinking like, oh, it's going to be like this. And then you get married and you're
right,
like, it is nothing like this.
right. And then you see what other couples are wanting, and of course, everybody wants to be seen in a good light.
Yeah.
They're not bringing
Yep.
you the dirty laundries. They're not
Nope.
bringing you the stuff, the struggles that they are experiencing
Everything's
in the
great.
home.
They say,
So
how's
you'll
marriage?
see the
Marriage is great.
couples.
Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
yes, right,
Yep.
right. So oftentimes when we have these expectations and then we get in marriage and we are faced with the reality, sometimes it can be shocking and it can be
Mm-hmm.
very difficult to work through those challenges.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's shift gear a little bit. Let's talk about,
Okay.
when we're seeing society today. You mentioned you have two, beautiful girls that you are bringing up. And when we see the state of our world, there's a lot to be concerned about. What are some of the things
Yeah.
that you are concerned about when you are, for your children and the
You
state
you
of the
you know
family?
yes. I think Yeah, that is a good shift because one, we're black. So I think, and to make a bold statement like that is the biggest thing, because there's a lot of issues going on in the world right now. But for me, the color of my skin is the biggest for me, because one, we're black. I have a black husband, you know what I'm saying? I have two black girls, and we're living in a society where the color of our skin is not valued or appreciated. And so I'm having to be reminded of, like, we walk out those doors daily. There is this thing of like, not everyone is for me. It's not everyone's for my family. Not everyone's for my girls. And so there is this
Right.
fear of like, we go into the store, the eyes that look at us, the conversations I
Right.
have to have in the car before my girls enter the store or wherever we're gonna go. And I'm like, it's tiring already to just have these conversations, and they're young, and I have to have it because I'm just like, man, we're not seen like everybody else. And so I think, like, for me, the biggest thing is that now, though we're black, but then on top of it, we're Haitian. And so having to see how society looks at the Haitian people, it's like having to remind my children that they come from greatness. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're the first black
Right.
republic nation. And so having to have that proud, very like resilience, like view of like, man, we are kings and queens, you know what I'm saying? And yet, though, what society views our nation, and having that tension of just like, okay, back home we're looked at this way, and then we're here and we're looked at that way. And then my kids are Haitian American, and it's just kind of like they carry that both with them, you know. And
Right.
so I think that is one of the things that like kind of fear me. But I also think of like this perception of like us as black women having to be strong, and I'm having to try to raise my girls like to be strong too, like I remember like growing up, and one of the things my mom used to always say to me is like, hey, you need to learn how to cook and clean, because one day you're going to need to. And it pointed more towards like having a spouse, but when I look back now, and I'm like, I think she just wanted us to be independent, to know we can do these things on our own. And I think I'm
Right.
looking in society, and I'm like, there's a perception on how black women should be, how black girls should be. And already there's an instillness of like, we need to be strong. We need to like hold it down, like no matter like what. And I'm just like, wow, where is the whole, it's okay if you don't have it together, and that's still strength. To say I'm not okay
Right.
is equivalent to like, that's strength, that's courage, that's bravery. So I think it's those two things. There is this thing of like, raising a black family and how the world views us and sees us. And then there is this thing of just like, we as women in general, from Haitian in general, like I'm raising that in them.
Black family, there, when they see us, they see absent fathers, they see single
Yeah.
moms. And and I know, like, for me personally, my own personal experience, when I tell people, I have 6 children, they look at me like, really? Sometimes they'll say, like, are they for the same father? And it's like, it's shocking. Oh, it's for, oh, you married and you're not single.
Yeah.
um and also, another thing that you said that I think is very important, being the how we are viewed as, women. We are supposed to have it all together. And then I also think too, society has sexualized women. It's like,
Girl.
even our young girls, you go to the store to go buy clothes for you haven't reached the teenage years yet, but then you go to the store to buy clothes for them, and it's like shorts. It's like,
Yeah.
do they not make shorts where it's not, showing
Yeah.
their butt cheeks hanging out?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and what's cool is to have the shirts with the cleavage showing out,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how our girls are viewed and what they see. Okay,
Yeah.
if I want to look cool, if I want to look nice, I have to
Then
dress a
I have to look
certain way.
sexy. Yep. Yep.
Right. I have to look sexy. I have to have this kind of persona, or present
Yeah.
myself this way to be viewed as, a
Yeah.
beautiful woman. And
Mm-hmm.
I think very challenging, not only for, us black women, but, our girls. What are we, how do we teach them that don't have to fall into that trap, because
Yeah.
that's all around them. How do we teach them, hey, it's okay to
Yeah.
dress modestly, and you are still
Yep. Yep.
beautiful, and you
Yep.
don't have to
That's
dress
true.
this way to draw attention or for someone to like you. And if
Mm-hmm.
somebody is interested in that, then you don't want that person
Yeah,
um,
that's right.
in your life, because
That's right.
so it can be very
Y-
challenging, I think, especially
Yeah.
for girls. And then our boys, they walk out and they're a threat.
You're a
So
target.
how do we teach
Yeah.
our young men?
Yeah.
How do we teach them to themselves and
Yeah.
to make sure that we keep them safe? So I think there's so much as, Black families that we have to be real about and to talk about,
Yeah.
um, and
It's like
keeping our children safe.
it's like even with the conversations we as black families have to have, like I think about, like I don't think other families are having to have the same conversation the ways that we have with our kids, you know what I'm saying? Like I have a couple of white friends, and
Right,
I'll like say, hey, I have to have this conversation to, Ragel, or like what, and that's not them. Like a lot of the white families or other families are not preparing their kids. It's like, hey, when you go into the store, X, Y, and Z, or hey, you're going back to school, do this. It's like we have to, like, there's an extra layer of conversations that we have to have, and we know it as black families. We look at each other, we're like, yo, did you have that talk yet? Where, as parents, you would be more concerned about, hey, did you have to talk about sex? And they're like, every parent could be
right,
equal in that, no matter what race you are. But in the black family,
right,
we have layers and layers and layers of conversation where you're like, man, why do we have to have our conversation? There's not enough words to tell our sons and daughters to protecting themselves, because at the end of the day, they're still seen as threat, no matter if they are compliant or
right,
not. And it's like,
right.
it's hard.
So how do you think that has affected our Black men?
I think a lot, because I think, like, there is this thing of like, okay, they want to be protectors of our family. You know what I'm saying? They want to provide for our families. They want to care for our families. One, it's like for those that have been wrongly accused and are not home, it's a state of like, oh, well, that's a typical black family. The father's not home. Sometimes they've been wrongly accused and that's why they're not in the home. You know what I'm saying? And then when they are in the home, there's not enough appreciation of just kind of like, oh yeah, you see a family that has a mother, that has a father, and that has children. I think the pressure for black men is something that we're never gonna really understand. For the, like, we're a threat as black women, you know what I'm saying? And we have like different things that are going on with us. But when we look at society of what's happening, it's the killing of black men that's happening more and more, that are leaving the homes more vulnerable, and leaving some of the women single, and leaving some of the children that are fatherless, you know what I'm saying? And I fear, like, though, like every time Raquel leaves that door to go to work, whether his job is 5 minutes away or 50 minutes away, there is this thing of like, Lord, would you spare his life that he's able to come home to us? Like, you know what I'm saying? Or like
Right.
not having him go out late at night or things like that. There's that fear that's in you where it's just kind of like, oh my gosh, like you don't want to receive that phone call or whatever. So I think there is this thing for black men, that there's so much pressure of like, can I
Right.
be alive? Like, do I have the ability to see the next day? And if I do, it's like, I made it through this day, just because of like the
Right.
state that we're in right now. We're like, so many of our black men, our black brothers, and have been taken away from us, you know what I'm saying? Like, for no reason.
It is very challenging. And what do you think is the state of the Black family? Do you think we are working together and working toward the challenges, or are we tearing each other down? Like you have the women tearing the men down, men.
I think it's so complex, because I think if, when you're dealing with race as a whole, let's just pick that one first. If we're talking about race as a whole versus like the black family versus like everything that's happening around us, there is this thing of like, oh, we're together about it, you know what I'm saying? As far as like, we could be on the same page, as far as like, no, we're going to preserve our family as much as we can. Let's try to protect our families and look out for each other. And then you have the thing about, okay, well, in the black family, you have marital stuff, and so you have parenting stuff or whatever. There's this kind of thing of like, we could be one and we're going to hold each other down, but there is disagreements that a wife and a husband can have, and that doesn't take away from them uh being the strong black family that is needed, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I think it's complex, where I was just kind of like, all right, how do we look out for each other? And yet then there's these interpersonal or inner tensions that happen within that, you know what I'm saying? So for example, I'm Haitian, And I'm like, yo, I'm proud to be Haitian. I love it. But we know there's dirty laundry in the Haitian community too. You know what I'm saying? But that it depends on the people that I'm talking to. We can have a conversation where it's just kind of like, yo, I love being Haitian, but like, man, we have issues too. No get there full. We have these things that could be this way or that way or whatever. But I'm not going to present those things in front of a group of people that wouldn't understand our own issues. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I think for us in the Black community, people always talking about like, yeah, there's race issues. Yeah, cops are killing us. But then we have Black on Black crime too. I'm like, it's two different things we got going on here, where it's just kind of like, yes, that is an issue. We're not negating that, but you can't bring up killing of police officers, whatever you know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to get off a tangent, but I think it's complex. So answer your original question, I think
Right.
it's complex in the family where we're gonna uplift each other. We're gonna like preserve that. But I think there's also this thing of like, yeah, do I have issues with my Black husband sometimes? Or does a Black man have issues with the wife sometime? Or all this kind, of course there is. Or there's this thing of like, do Black men value us as women? Do they pick us, or do they go outside their race or whatever? So there's always going to be these complex issues. But I think for us, we could look at each other and be like, we have to preserve our race, because as a whole, the world doesn't like us. So if we don't have each other's back, who will, you know?
Right. And then to talk a little bit about the cultural aspect, I'm thinking in the context of, the Haitian culture, where you have the expectation of, husband and wife. And in the Haitian culture, it is expected that the women, they provide, care for the children and the house. And that's, they cook, they clean, they take care of the house, they take care of the kids. And then you have the husband, they work, and then they
Chill.
are absent from the responsibilities of
Yes.
household and children,
Yeah.
and which can be very challenging because in our
Very.
society, most household, you have two working parents. And
Yes.
oftentimes, as a woman, you working and then you having to come home and then take care of the house, take care of the kids. That can be very,
Mm-hmm.
very challenging. Do you think that's changing, or do you think that it's something that's not addressed? Do you think that, it's something that we've created for ourselves? What are your thoughts?
I think that's something that is definitely not discussed,
Right,
because I think you have the mentality, like I said in the previous question, I grew up where my mom was like, you need to learn how to cook clean so you can have a husband one day. And I think it's also like, oh, so you can be independent. But when we look at it, it's so you can have a husband. And so I think growing up, Haitian is just kind of like, it's set for us. Like, we cook clean and we hold down the house, we hold down the children, and they can go working. And then none of the things about this, the house matters to them. I think it's not discussed, because to discuss it would mean then as women, we don't know our role. You know what I'm saying? And for me, I'm like, okay, I don't think I was created to be a woman just to cook, clean, and take care of children and be at
right,
home. You know what I'm saying?
right,
Because things are shifting. So we
right,
have now some men, some fathers are stay at home dads.
right,
You know what I'm saying? We have now where like we have so much opportunities as women to be in corporate America or to be entrepreneurs or whatever. And so it allows us to be the ones to travel more, and the fathers stay
right,
back home. So the role is shifting. And so there is not a conversation of just like, okay, gender roles has to be thrown out the window to really be able to say like, let's revamp this conversation. Because just because, like, say for a woman is the one that's working outside the home does not mean she's taking the role of a male role. No, she's a
right,
very strong, independent, assertive woman, and she has opportunities. That doesn't mean like, oh, she's wearing the pants. And like, we have to shift that language. It has to change. Now,
right,
specifically speaking in the Haitian community, there is this thing of just kind of like, it's so cultural and so ingrained that it's sort of this expectation of just like, okay, a woman, not only she's been laboring all day at home, and so when she cooks, she has to take out her husband's food to plate it and all this kind of stuff, and then she has to clean up again, or whatever. And that's sort of like this look of like, well, that's your role, woman. Or I even think about gatherings. We're at a social event. A lot of times the women will congregate towards the kitchen trying to set up and
right,
serve, when the guys can go out having a drink and be outside. I think it's not discussed enough, because if it was discussed, if I think we can discuss it, there could be an offense of just like, well, women know their role and men know their role, instead of having an honest conversation as far as like, hey, that's not gender roles. That's just saying, hey, you as my husband, here's where you can help me, and I'm your wife, here I can help you. You know what I'm saying? It's a honest conversation. When I got with Raquel, and again, I'm so extreme, I was just kind of, let me let you know something right now. Look, I know how to do X, Y, and Z. So you don't have to worry about this voyeur how they expected women to be. I know these things, but I did. And I looked him in the eye and I said, I know all these things. But here's the thing, I'm coming in so honest with you, saying like, do not expect me to do those things and be those things, because I'm working that out of me. I'm working where I'm like, I love to serve, I love to clean, I love to take care of our family, but I don't want to feel like that we're in this relationship and then you're looking at me like how the Haitians have told you, make sure your wife can do X, Y, and Z, you know. And we would have conversation where like people would talk about like, hey, do you plate Raquel's food? And I'm like, no, he can get up his own plate and food, like his hands ain't broken or whatever. And I could see him look a certain way, and I'm like, okay, what was that about? And he was just like, I don't know. And I was like, do you expect me to take your plate or whatever? It was so good for us to actually talk through that, because I was just kind of like, I know I can do those things, but the fact that like we're in a room and they expect us women to get up to go do that, that bothers me, Raquel. Instead of this thing of like, I naturally want to do that, or that's just a small incident of just like the whole dishing out the food, where I'm like, I would love to do, let's do it. But I think there's this thing in me that I'm like trying to fight off. It's just like, mba bonu, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm your wife, you know what I'm saying? And I think it's partnership. I think it's like, you work, and yes, I'm gonna hold down the house and hold down the kids or whatever, but I'm like, that doesn't mean you come off and then it's like you don't bathe them or you don't feed their dinner or you don't cook or whatever. I'm like, it needs to be equal. It needs to be this thing of like what I can do, you can do. I could do the laundry, you can do the laundry too. How do we exchange that, instead of like, no, you do the laundry because you're a woman and then you go out to work because you're a man? You know what I'm saying? Like, the family's changing, the dynamic is changing. There has to be an honest conversation between the husband and the wife to say which role and the descriptions of what we need to do can fit for us in that specific family, instead of like, all Haitian women need to do that or all Haitian men need to do that. You know what I'm saying? So yeah.
Right, you're right. Because, you know, society has changed, the world keeps progressing, and there are conversations that we need to have. We need to have these real serious conversations, because what worked for one family may not work for the other. And I love how you said, you know, with the roles, the gender roles. Yeah, we have roles, but within the roles, then there are responsibility, there are tasks. They don't have roles does not equals task. You could be the head of the house
I love that.
and
I
need,
love that.
but at the same time, that doesn't mean because you're the leader, there are certain tasks you are unable to do because
That's
you
right.
have that role.
I love that.
And these are serious conversations we need to have. And working together as a team, husband,
Yep.
wife, we, you know, the children, every family, and there are
Yep.
certain tasks that can be assigned to whoever based on, hey, what my strengths are.
I love.
And
That's great.
but I think what happens, society has said, hey, this is what it is. And sometimes it's ourselves that have placed these boundaries on
Yeah.
ourselves. And then we get overwhelmed because it's not working.
Yeah.
Because it's challenging. Could you imagine? You are, let's say you are working full time, you know, stress at work, coming home, and now you are expected to now come home and work your other full-time job.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And cannot work if you don't have somebody who's willing to work together with you
Yeah.
and partner with you. That can be overwhelming, and very
Yeah. Yeah.
that needs to take place within the family, is
Yeah.
talking about, okay, yes, we have roles, but then there are responsibilities and tasks associated with the family.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be, roles does not equal task.
Yeah.
And that's one of the chapters in the book about roles and
Yeah.
task and
Yeah.
responsibility
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah. I
So,
wanted to highlight on, I wanted to highlight on this thing real quick that you said, you know, the whole role and task. I think you hit it on the nail. I remember when I was living in Haiti and I had just moved there, and I've never lived in Haiti before or whatever. So I visited or whatever. And I remember, and that's when I realized how American I was. I was like, man, I just thought like, yo, I'm Haitian from Haitian 100%. And then I lived there and I'm like, yeah, right, I am not. And they made sure to remind me that I'm not. But here's the thing. I think like I would have certain conversation with certain Haitian moms there. I always felt like I wasn't Haitian enough, because I was like, obviously, like, you know, I would raising Anna at the moment, you know, she would have a schedule, nap time, you know, I was trying to do all these things or whatever. And it's like, just get the dummy whenever she wants or like whatever. But I remember like it's lunchtime, you know, lay out by my, and then there was this look of like, okay, get up and go get Ragel's food, or get up and go get whatever the men that was coming in our place or whatever. And I just remembered like feeling so like under pressure. And I remember like, you know, like, no, it's buffet style. We're all gonna get it. And they looked at me just kind of like, no, that's not what you do. And you don't understand, Maggie. I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, like, I'm really not Haitian. But it's more so not Haitian. I'm just like, oh my God, I'm not really a femme Haitian, because I'm like, I didn't want to go do that. And I was seen as rude or malgré. And it's not because of that. I'm just like, their hands ain't broke. Like, how did you get it too? But I think it was sort of like this thing of like, I couldn't fight that, because I was, one, if I dared to question that, then it was sort of like I'm disrespectful. You know what I'm saying? I think I saw
You
more
were
of my
going
American
outside the norm of that society. Yes.
So when you said gender roles and tasks, like that is key right there, yo. That's key.
So we have to wrap it up.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, of course. I appreciate that. I appreciate the, you know, you taking the time out to sit down and talk. So as we wrap up, tell us what are some things that you do to balance it all? You know, to be you, who you are, who God created you to be,
Mm-hmm.
and then to be a mom and a wife. How do you do it?
So recently I decided to go back to school. You know, so this is 14 years out of school, going back to school. So trying to balance being a student part-time, you know, being a mom, being a wife. I think for me was the biggest thing was like having to have a conversation with Ragel and that we're both on board, because realizing like I couldn't do it all and I needed him to have my back. Not because I said it, because I think he realizes like, yo, as a husband, how do I really care for my family, you know? And so I think the biggest thing that's helped me to balance it all is like, one, Ragel needed to be on board. And so then for me to realize like, okay, you know, I have a 6-year-old and I have a 3-year-old. So there's 3-year gap in that. And I'm like, the needs of my 6-year-old is a little different from my 3-year-old, and realizing like, how can I still do one-on-one with them? So they're feeling like I'm there for them, and then therefore that they're forming their own bond. And then realizing Ragel and I needed time. So during this COVID thing, you know, we were realizing like, man, we fought more because we were in each other's face more. But then I think the conflict allowed us to grow deeper, where realizing like, okay, you know,
Right.
you want to take steps to work on yourself, and I need to take steps working on myself. So therapy has been good for us, you know what I'm saying, individually, you know what I'm saying? So I think that's one of the things that have helped, realizing like, okay, in order for us to find balance, we have to work
Right.
on each other individually, you know? So I think that played a role too. And I think finding ways to have fun with each other, even though we're not going out, the crazy things that we used to do, but like trying to play games at home, or trying to watch a show together, you know?
Right.
You know, this is a year in since we bought our home. So trying to settle in, trying to realize like, okay, the things that we went through, we have to talk through them, but it doesn't have to be an ongoing conversation every single day. We need to
Right.
figure out joy in the midst of tension, you know? So I think
Right. Right.
that's been helping to balance.
That's good. That's good. And I know I remember once I was in this training, and I don't remember if it was a participant or the trainer who asked me this question. It's like, what is, you know, your hobby? What do you do for yourself? We're sitting there, I'm like thinking for myself.
what,
I'm
what
like,
kind
well,
of
I
question
do
is
this,
that?
I hang out with my kids, you know, I'm telling her I do this with my kids and my husband. And she's looking at me, she's like, what about for you? What do you do for yourself? And I remember like years later, that happened like many years, and I'm like, am I weird? The fact that I couldn't
Myself?
think, I couldn't think of anything that I do for myself, because
Yeah.
it's like my family, you know. I'm like
Yes.
thinking, you know, I do
Yes.
this for them, you know, and that's where I find my joy. But recently, I've started gardening, and I find it to be very therapeutic.
I saw.
Yes. Yes, and it's really for me, so
Yeah.
I'll wake up in the morning, I'll go out back, look at my, my plants, and it feels good.
Yeah.
And I get what, she was saying back then, like,
Yeah.
for yourself, you do need that. It's very important. It's good to bond with, with your spouse, have, bond with your children, but you also need time
You're
for
right.
you.
Yep.
And that's why I've also made it a point too, in the morning I have my me time where, me and God. And because we do need that opportunity to replenish, because as women, naturally we want to give, we want to take care,
Oh,
we want to
girl.
nurture.
Yeah.
Sometimes we put, pour so much out that we don't
Yeah.
take time to replenish. And then when,
Yeah.
we're not replenished, then there's not much that we can give. So
Yeah.
it's very self-care, and to think of ways to replenish and to have
That's good.
that, me time.
Yeah.
So want to always remember to do that, where it's not
I
like
need
so
to.
strange, like
I need to.
well, it's like me time. But once again, thank you so much for taking the time out and for us, to sit down and have this conversation. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add before we close.
No, this was great. I think, yeah, we need to have more and more conversations like this. I think your book is a great avenue to have these conversations, because I think people are already having them or thinking them, but we're not having them together. And there's something about finding ways to have it together. And I don't know, we can get more out of it because it'll help the communities, it will help the relationships, so I'm just grateful for you taking, like, I remember when you told me, like, his there was a goal, you wanted to get this done, and to watch you, to be a witness for you to do it, and then here we are months later, like, you're now unpacking it, you know what I'm saying? I'm just like, man, everybody needs a Maggie in their lives, so I think for me, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share, to say, like, in essence, too, you're getting women that or just people that are saying, like, hey, I'm an open book, let's have this conversation to better our community. We better in our community as we better ourselves, you know what I'm saying? So I'm really
Right.
grateful for that. So thank you for actually, like, inviting me to be a part of this conversation. It means a lot, Maggie.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate your genuineness and your honesty. That's one of the things that draws me to you, is the fact that you are so open and so honest.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much.